Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed, part 2 of the October Q&A. If you missed part 1, watch it after this, and there'll be a part 3 coming up, so make sure you subscribe for that. But before we get into it, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by WOLFBOX and their MegaFlow handheld turbofans. The MegaFlow 100 features a 150,000 RPM brushless motor that enables a wind speed of 45 meters per second and offers up to 100 minutes of runtime. This makes it ideal for heavy-duty tasks like cleaning your PC, while still being capable of easier jobs with variable speed control. There's also the MegaFlow 50, a more budget-friendly option that still packs impressive power with a 110,000 RPM motor, 3 speed settings, and up to 240 minutes of runtime. Both models come with a handful of attachments and are charged via USB Type-C for maximum convenience. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. All right, Tim. Even GN. Whenever a comment starts with even GN, what are you in for?
Oh, it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, what has even GN done? So even GN is now calling frame generation tech performance boost. Oh. Do you think NVIDIA's preaching is working and frame generation will be accepted by gamers as a positive? I don't know about GN doing this. Last time I spoke with Steve, we seemed pretty much on the same page about the technology being like a frame smoothing technology. I know I've seen Digital Foundry, for example, get on board with that messaging. So
I think this is probably a misread of the recent GN video that they did on lossless scaling. Right. I think the GN title and thumbnail was something along the lines of, and maybe we can put it on screen now, like $7 performance boost, which may be interpreted as frame generation is a performance boost because lossless scaling has a frame generation feature, but it also has other scaling features that could be considered a performance boost because they lower the render resolution and improve latency. So I think they sort of went with that title, obviously because of, YouTube reasons.
Well, it's a title and thumbnail, but what is the content of the video? Like, are they saying that frame generation boosts performance? Are they not saying that?
I'm not sure because I didn't watch that far into the video.
Yeah, I haven't watched that particular video myself.
So yeah, not sure about that one, but I think in general, like, is NVIDIA's marketing of this being a performance boost, has that worked? Is that sort of gamers getting on board with that? I don't think so. I think it's probably not worked, is the way I would interpret it. I mean, I sort of find this sort of thing hard because I do see very casual gaming content that has a very different sort of view on frame generation. I think it's more just from the fact of
casuals like GN.
Well, not necessarily. Maybe there's another GN out there, gaming network or something.
The gaming network, that's what we're talking about.
I'm thinking more about your very casual streamers, game reviewers, game testers who play on PC, who might fire up a game like Battlefield 6 or Borderlands 4 or something and hit frame generation and doubles the frame rate output, and so conclude that, this is really impressive technology, whatever. There is still that happening.
Well, we see a lot in the comments when we do a GPU like Borderlands 4 or Battlefield 6, and people are like, how is your performance so bad? I'm getting 200, 300 FPS, mine's silky smooth, there's something wrong with your system. It's like, turns out they've got frame generation turned on, and they think they're actually seeing 300 frames per second.
Yeah, we saw that a bit with not Battlefield, but Borderlands 4, when the CEO of Gearbox, Randy Pitchford, was doing his sort of on X Twitter, going through and optimizing people's setups and often suggesting to turn on frame generation or linking to people's videos where they had turned on frame generation and had gotten quote-unquote better performance. It's solved. So I think the two ways to look at it is sort of, there's that very casual crowd, which is enabling things like that and going, this is a performance boost. But I think among our audience, so sort of the enthusiast gaming crowd, the PC builders, the people who are interested in GPU reviews to look at the performance of cards, who don't just go and buy an RTX 5070 because it's a popular card that their mates have. So I'm thinking our audience, GN, Digital Foundry, especially for their PC content.
That's the Gamers Nexus GN, Steve.
Gamers Nexus, Steve Burke, not my Mythical Gaming Network channel.
And now avid frame gen enthusiast.
Apparently, maybe we're throwing him under the bus by calling him a frame gen.
I can't wait to catch up with him next year at Computex. It'll be awkward.
Yeah, and I think we're seeing, again, a very similar thing to what I've just been talking about, the difference between the enthusiast channels and the casual audience when we saw the 5070 marketing back at CES of this year.
The 4090, you mean?
Well, that's what they said, right? And people immediately, because that live stream and all the announcements gets a much more broad audience than you would see from reviews on our channel. People going crazy thinking that the 5070 was actually going to deliver 4090 performance because that's what it was advertised to show. But then quite quickly, certainly we looked at it, and a lot of our sort of channels, looked into it and sort of went, that's obviously frame generation tech being used there. And so, the narrative was very different among the enthusiast community. But I think among our audience right now, I don't think people believe frame generation would allow a 5070 to be a 4090. Like, people know that while it's claimed to be performance, the experience is not the same. And so ultimately you can't call it that really. But yeah, I mean, my problem with this has always been that I feel like NVIDIA sort of preyed on people's, they preyed on, I guess, their interpretation of what FPS meant. Like, when frame generation first debuted, everyone associated FPS to mean the same thing. It meant a smoother experience because you were getting more frames output to your monitor, and lower input latency because by displaying more frames, you were getting your CPU inputs, your inputs to the CPU to the game more quickly. So lower latency and a smoother experience. And NVIDIA knew that. It's not like they came up with some random situation where suddenly everyone always decoupled the FPS output from the latency, because that absolutely was not the case at the time, and no one thought that way. And they sort of used that to say, well, the frame rate's gotten a lot higher because of frame generation, but now also you have to decouple frame rate from latency. And they did both things at the same time, which was very confusing for people.
Yep.
And sort of created this whole mess. And that's what allowed them to do this whole performance thing, right? Whereas maybe now people are a bit more aware of how these things sort of work. And
people have tried it out as well.
Yeah, that's right. Many more people have these features and understand how it works. And certainly, we were just talking about stuttering in games, right? If your game is stuttering, you can't just turn on frame gen, get more performance and fix stuttering. Like, it stutters, but now the output is higher, but your 1% lows are very similar. So yeah, that's sort of the frame gen thing. Be interested to know from you guys in the comments what you think, especially if you've tested it now that it's available on more GPUs and that sort of thing. So yeah.
How close is PC gaming to becoming unaffordable for the average person, assuming that hasn't already happened in the last year? Yeah, I've thought about this a bit. It's a sensitive subject to tackle, but I think one of the easiest ways to sort of summarize what's going on is the shift in PC gaming. It's become like, once upon a time, if you were sort of a PC enthusiast, achieving near top end performance for your next game PC wasn't too difficult. Like, you could get like a GTX 1070 or 1080 for a reasonable price, and go back even further. There's more of a gap between like the people willing to spend a lot of money and then what would have previously be considered a reasonable large amount of money. So it's more segmented, I guess, is the easiest way to put that. And whereas more people found themselves targeting what would be upper mid-range to high-end performance, they're now like entry level to very much mid-range performance. And I guess that's where the frustration is, because they're PC enthusiasts. They've been playing PC games all their life. They like to really get, a higher end PC, and to do so now it's just absurdly expensive. But you can still get a very capable, and I get sensitive subject. I'm not justifying any prices. I'm not saying what's good or bad. I'm more just explaining reality, how things are. And again, I don't even know what terms to use without triggering some people here, but you can still get a very capable gaming PC for what I think is reasonably affordable. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's a reasonable PC given what we were used to. Again, it's really difficult to talk about this and get it right without offending certain people or whatever, but it's not like it's unobtainable, like you can't game at all. So just recently I did some what I thought were really good value 1440p game PCs. Now, should they be twice as fast for that money? Yeah, probably, but they're not. And you can still play a lot of games, especially some of the most popular games out there at the moment. Like, they play them really well. So you can do PC gaming, but can you buy a 4090 and a 9800X 3D and a high-end motherboard and all of that stuff, and then you quickly end up with a PC worth thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars? And while that would be nice, you don't need that. Like, there's so many games you can play on a 9060 XT or a 5060 Ti or whatever, RTX 5070, RX 9070. Like, these are pretty reasonably priced products. Yeah, again, they should be faster for the money, but there are tons of games you can play on those products and get a really great experience. So
I think the shift in the PC platform in general is a very interesting thing, because if you go back like 20 years, the PC platform was very, very different to today. A lot of the time, if you were after a premium gaming experience, that wasn't necessarily the PC platform, because a lot of games weren't available on PC at all. And so if you were playing the latest AAA titles, it may not have run on your PC. You had to buy a PlayStation or an Xbox or whatever the consoles were of the time. That was, in some ways, the premium gaming experience. And the PC platform was used for other titles. So like your strategy games, RTSs, that sort of thing was really what a lot of people were building PCs for, in addition to some of the time you would see games come across to the PC platform as well. But there were many more console exclusives, whereas today the PC platform has sort of become an all-encompassing solution for people, where if you wanted to play a lot of console games, you get a better experience on PC. Whereas 20 years ago, that better experience on PC thing wasn't a reality at all. Like, it didn't exist. And so that's opened up this more premium experience, the more premium casual experience. So people who already might have bought, say, a PS5 Pro can go the next level and spend even more money on a PC. And that's where you get your sort of 5080 builds, the $2,000 US PCs come into play, when they might not have 20 years ago, because people were just, sort of more, I see it as more sort of like an alternate or complementary system to have along with consoles, whereas now it can be more of a replacement. And obviously PC gaming, the quality of PC games, I know people complain about optimization, but 10 years ago, games launched in truly horrendous states with key features that we now take for granted in PC missing. Things like VSync, things like remappable keyboard controls, things like anything above a 60 FPS frame rate. These features, which are now commonplace, were not a thing previously. So that's opened up this higher tier. I think, you're talking about things like a 5060 Ti. Comparatively, that product stacks up quite well. It is quite a powerful GPU.
When I did like the 5 years or the 4 or 5 generations of stagnation, this latest generation from AMD in particular, but also NVIDIA, is the best we've seen at the lower end market.
Yeah, and it is offering you the performance of previous flagships from a couple of generations ago. Like, it is 2080, it's faster than a 2080 Ti, for example.
Yeah, I think the concern is you look at the top of the mid-range to the extreme high end, and that segment's, generally speaking, gotten worse value probably the last 3 generations, or, because
let's creep up the stack.
Yeah, less obtainable, worse value. And I think the concern is that people are expecting that trend to continue, because so far it's continued to continue. I don't know if it's going to or not. So it's like, it's not great now. My next PC, how bad's that going to be? I think that's also a big part of the concern here. But I think, and this is what I said when this first started happening, and I got heaps of blowback, if you remember when I made it was Twitter back then. And I basically said there's been a huge shift in the gaming market. There's many more gamers now. There's many more adults gaming that have more disposable income. It's not just a thing targeting younger people and kids.
Yep.
So AMD, NVIDIA in particular, has identified this shift in their, their core demographic, and they've now segmented the market accordingly. So there's the 30 to 40-year-olds and plus now that can potentially afford an RTX 5090, whereas previously that market didn't exist, at least to the degree that it does. And so, yeah, they've met that. They've either met the demand or taken advantage of that demand with those products.
Yeah.
So that's why you're seeing things going the way they are. And I guess the hope is they've made that segmentation shift now. So are things going to settle in there and continue on for a bit? Or is it just going to continue to get more and more ridiculous where the top end cards like right up here and costs are right up here? Because we've continued to see that to date.
Yeah, it's a hard one. I think, obviously one of the main impacts that has had is the removal of very cheap GPUs. So right at the bottom end of the market, when we used to see $100 graphics cards, that's now no longer a thing. So it's much harder today to build that sort of console equivalent PC.
Mm-hmm.
Really, the PC platform is a premium version of a console experience, as I was sort of saying.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, again, like 10 years ago, you could build, especially more towards the back end of a console generation, like we are in right now, you could have built, PCs that outperform those consoles for about the same price or maybe only a small premium. Now it's much more questionable whether that you could do that because, again, the lack of the products right at the low end. But another angle that I sort of look at it as is, there's a lot of games that don't require the latest hardware.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're a AAA gamer and you're trying to play, your cyberpunk type games, Borderlands, those type of titles, it's certainly, you need to keep up with the pace of hardware innovation. But on the multiplayer competitive side of things, it's not really a requirement. Like you don't need GPUs from this generation to play Battlefield 6 or really any other main competitive title. You can look across pretty much any of them. They run very well most of the time on today's hardware.
Well, Battlefield 6 is really enjoyable on low settings as well.
That's right.
For the multiplayer portion.
Looks great on low settings, especially if you turn up the textures again. So that, I think the game developers are they're working with gamers on this for the multiplayer side of things, where they sort of understand that not everyone's going to have a 5090, and for our game to be a success, we need this game to run on the lowest tier hardware, which may be hardware from 5, 7, 10 years ago. And so that's what they designed for. And that's why you see multiplayer games scaling so well, most of them.
In most of those games, a 5090 is not even of benefit.
Yeah, there's no point getting a 5090 because you'd be CPU limited.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on the configuration that you play. But certainly a game like Valorant, like you don't really need a 5090 to get a really high frame rate in that sort of title. So I think that's part of it, is there's a lot of frustration with where things are today. But depending on the type of games you play, and we've talked again in the past about, you don't necessarily need to use ray tracing. You don't necessarily need to use ultra settings to get a very smooth frame rate, to have nice looking visuals. And games as well, they're sort of slowing down in terms of the innovation in visuals. So today, like, you could have a card from 5 years ago and still be getting, in today's titles on medium settings, really good quality visual experience. Whereas if you go back 10 years ago, the low experience would often be very bad. And that can still be the case in today's games as well. But this is all sort of playing into the, people are now upgrading less often. So that's slowed down. Previously, it used to be people would upgrade every 2 or 3 years. Now it's more like 4 or 5 years because the generations have gotten longer. People are keeping products for longer. So a PC sort of goes further now as well. I think if you went back to sort of my 20-year example, there were times that games would come out where you would need to upgrade your PC for that game because it literally wouldn't work because features were not available in that version of the shader model or whatever that the card supported. And so I remember back, when I was very young, you had to look at like the feature support for cards, like what shader model does the game run at, what shader model did the card have, what DirectX versions are supported, because if there was a mismatch there, just flat out would not work, whereas that's not really a sort of a problem anymore. Does this make PC gaming affordable? I feel like for building new PCs, it's very much like, you can get reasonable sort of builds, as you've said, but there's a lot of unreasonableness in parts of the market. But I feel like today, older hardware is going a lot further than it has if you go back to those golden days of times that people talk about where upgrading was really affordable, but I feel like hardware didn't go as far. So you had to upgrade more often. Maybe that's just my thinking on that, but I certainly feel like that's kind of the case, especially if you're a multiplayer gamer.
Yep. All right. AMD has said two 3D V-cache CCDs on the same CPU would hurt performance as processors move between CCDs. Well, there's definitely a latency penalty to be paid there based on previous testing. Now they are releasing the 9950X3D2. That's confusing. Well, that is confusing. That's a crazy name. Hasn't been confirmed yet, though, this is coming, has it?
I think it's a rumor that originates from one of those anonymous X/Twitter accounts that probably takes rumors from Chinese forums, which is usually how these things go. So it's very much unconfirmed. I don't know, is it going to happen?
I've not heard anything from AMD about this yet. We're getting pretty late in the year, so
yeah,
is
maybe
it going to be
early next year?
Will it be a CES announcement thing?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't think this will actually be a part that would be worth purchasing simply because of it not having any sort of performance benefit.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in your testing, you showed the latest 16-core models match like a 9800X3D in performance, right? Because they've fixed a lot of improved a lot of the scheduling issues that now make the 16-core
Yes,
good.
It would only be if you could utilize the additional 8 cores on that part for playing a game like Battlefield 6, and then that would boost performance if they had 3D V-cache. But I can't really think of any games that saturate 8 cores, or like a 9800X3D. The utilization can get quite high in that game, but
yeah, would it benefit once it starts having to cross over into the other die?
Well,
the question there.
I'll be honest, I haven't done any of that CCD latency testing for a long time, so it'd be interesting to get like a dual CCD part and then use 4 cores from each CCD and then compare that to a single CCD.
Yeah.
So that could be interesting testing to do to see what sort of performance penalty there is. There used to be quite a large one, which is why when you go back, like the Ryzen 9 3950X, for example, was never better at gaming than just the single CCD model. Or CCX, I think it was back then. Anyway, I don't know is the answer. I haven't really looked into that, but there would be some performance penalty. But yeah, it might be worth doing an updated test because that would give us some insight into how beneficial it would be. But again, then you've got to have games that will utilize that many cores as a requirement. The core utilization thing is tricky because a game like Battlefield could utilize all of those cores, right? But if you're utilizing all 16 cores at, let's say, 20%, but then you go down to 8 cores and that gets you closer to like 50% utilization, you're not going to get a benefit from using more cores more lightly.
It might, most likely, the 16 cores at 20% will run worse
because of the
latency of running the workload across the two dies. And
you've got 2 big L3 pools then.
And then the CPU would probably try and move everything onto the one die anyway. So the scheduler optimizing for performance would do what the current single V-cache die is already doing. And so that's the sort of angle where it either would have no benefit to performance because it would just act like a 9800X3D or 9950X3D currently acts, or it would actually run worse if it tried to spread the load. And so then it would only be for, as you're saying, the games where a 9800X3D type part is being 100% maxed out and it could theoretically benefit from more cores.
Which would eventually happen. So I think now there's, back when we first tested, say, the 3950X against, say, the 3800X, the 3800X was always faster.
Yeah.
But there was getting to a point where we were starting to see a bit of a crossover. If we tested those two CPUs in Battlefield 6, there's the potential a 16-core model would actually be faster.
Yeah.
Because
it's a heavy load. So it's balancing it out across more
because
cores.
exactly as you just said with this future potential example, the 3800X would be pretty well maxed out by Battlefield 6, so additional CPU resources would become useful even if there's a latency penalty associated with actually using them. But we're not seeing any games completely max out a 9800X3D, and it sort of has to max it out and then some as well. Like
it has to overcome the penalty that would be associated with starting to access that second die.
Yeah.
So how much more it needs to operate at.
So I'm intrigued by such a product, and again, there is testing I need to do to sort of work out how potentially beneficial it could be in the near term. But also it's a rumored thing and it may not happen at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think AMD should release this part, and I told them as much back at CES, mainly for the reason that, we've seen these sort of pointless CPUs before, which are sort of like the KS models is sort of what I'm thinking at from Intel, where they make absolutely no sense. Like, they're slightly overclocked. They might give you 1 or 2% more performance. They cost so much more, but they're the best of the best part. And there's always a market, for some reason, for these best of the best models that give you everything, even if there's no actual performance reason to get that part, no value reason, nothing. People want the Black Edition or the KS or whatever. And so AMD should release it simply for that reason, is that there will be a market for some people who want the dual CCD version with Vcache on both CCDs because it's quote unquote the best. It doesn't matter whether it is the best or not, or whether there's an actual benefit. They will buy it because it's the top. You line up all the models. That one's at the top. That's the one they want to buy. And so that's the reason they should make that part. Of course, it'll get destroyed in reviews. So they kind of have to balance out the whole, like, what's the reception going to be like versus the benefit. If they make it a limited edition run or something, maybe that could be successful. But yeah.
Yeah, well, I can't really comment on how good it will be or won't be until we've actually tested it. So interesting. Not sure if it'll become a thing. All right. How much power supply capacity do you actually need? I'm tired of getting downvoted on Reddit for telling people they don't need 850 watts for their 7600 and 5060. Yeah, interesting one. Well, you definitely don't need 850 watts for that particular hardware combo. Why are you getting downvoted on Reddit? Not exactly sure. There's no real right or wrong answer here, though. So I wouldn't tell people just buy a 500 watt power supply. That's all you need. I really need to explain the whole situation and people then can make an informed decision. So those two parts combined, doing some rough sort of math, you could say 200 watts they would need for those two parts, 65 watt processor, but 145 watt GPU. There will be some transient spikes there and stuff, which will see them exceed that depending on the workload. And then, of course, you've got the motherboard, which will use some power. And all your fans and all that sort of stuff. But realistically, to see that system draw over 300 watts, I couldn't really see it happening. So 500 watts should be ample headroom there. So yeah, 550 watt would be perfectly fine. Now, if you said to me, I want to get the fastest GPU I can get, just want a CPU that's up to scratch, I want to spend as little money on the rest of the stuff. Like, you go on Buildzoid mode. You're putting the motherboard on the motherboard box.
Min-max. Just the way I like it.
Yeah, you min-maxing it. Tim likes doing that as well. You and Buildzoid probably have a bit in common. Then I would say, look, just get yourself a 500 watt power supply. I think here in Australia you can get like an okay-ish one for like 60, 70 Australian dollars, whereas the power supply I used in my build was more like $160. So, $100 saving there's not nothing. So if you're trying to save every last dollar, that's a reasonable way to go. But if you're saying to me, I'm trying to set up a decent computer, like, I'm spending a little bit more money on the case than I should because I want it to look nice and I want a heap of fans and I want it, I'll see myself building or upgrading, 2 or 3 times in this case. It's a great case. I'm going to look after it. Don't need to upgrade it. And then I'd be more suggesting, okay, well, I'd look at spending a bit more on your power supply because 500 watts, it's first of all, it's probably a lower quality power supply, might have the legs in it to see out, a 2 or 3 upgrade period. So there's that. And then if you want to upgrade your graphics card, like maybe next time you don't want a 5060 or there's, in this mythical future that I'm presenting here, there may be a really good high-end GPU that you can actually afford, and that'll use more power. So if you get a 650, 750, and then the thing as well is once you go to like 650, usually it's like $10 or so for a 750, and then in the case of the power supply use, going from 750 to 850 was actually 10 Australian dollars, which is like $1 in US money. I joke, kind of. So by that point, you've already made the leap. You might as well just go up to 850 watt. You get the 12 volt high powered connector. If you want to risk burning your house down, I joke again. But it comes with lots of... It's not just the capacity. You also get all the additional cables. So now you've got multiple PCIe power cables. So if you buy a card that has 3 8-pin connectors, you can connect up to that just fine. Whereas the lower-end power supplies may be a bit of a challenge.
There's some things that I used to look at. I used to try build PCs to make them really quiet, and the high capacity power supplies would have a larger capacity fanless. So before they start spinning up the fan, the 0 fan mode or whatever. So if you get like a really high capacity, you might get, let's say, the bottom 20 to 30% of that capacity will be fully silent, and so you could potentially fit that entire system into the fanless part of the curve on an 850 watt power supply. But if you bought a 650 watt, it may need to kick the fan on once you start getting into a gaming workload. Of course, that depends on how loud that fan's going to be. Is that actually relevant for your system? But so that's one potential reason to get
people
more.
talk about the efficiency windows as well.
The efficiency.
So that's where going down can be of benefit. But look, it's like I say, if you're aware of all of these various factors, then you can just make an informed purchase and go, well, you know what? I'm going on AM5. I think Zen6 might be a thing that I upgrade to in the future. Rumored that I could possibly even put a Zen7 CPU on this motherboard. So therefore, I can justify spending $50 more on the motherboard because I want to get a good motherboard that has the features that I need and updated this and that. Slightly better case, and a power supply that will be able to facilitate any potential upgrades in the future. It's certainly cheaper to buy that now. And people say, well, your power supply is not going to last forever. You might have to upgrade again anyway, which is a valid point. But I've had plenty of power supplies used in test systems that are over a decade old, and they still work fine. In fact, I don't think I've ever had a test system power supply fail. I'm not even sure
I've never had a power supply.
I've had one fail, and I think I told the story. It was when it caught on fire at that land.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
But that was I think like a defective kind of.
Yeah.
Anyway, I haven't really had them fail, so it's not something that's in the back of my mind going, maybe I shouldn't buy this power supply because it'll probably die before I can, use all of its capacity. So I don't think that's really a thing. Anyway, I don't think people should be getting too fired up on this one. I see people getting very passionately arguing for one way or the other. I think as long as you understand all the pros and cons, you can pick the one that makes sense for you. But generally speaking, when I build a computer for a friend, I'll just go a bit higher than what they need, just in case there are any spikes there in the workload or whatever. And you generally get slightly better components as well and stuff like that. And it's not a huge cost.
Yeah, and just quickly, the numbers that NVIDIA and AMD advertise for their graphics card support, like minimum power supply spec, that is designed to have such a large headroom on it that they can guarantee that that's going to be fine if you have a high power CPU and lots of fans and things built into the system.
And it's like an oils ain't oils type thing. Because all 850 watt power supplies aren't they don't have all the same current handling. And
exactly, or the same on the PCI, the same power output on the PCI rail. So they're trying to make sure that if you bought that graphics card and bought the power supply that they recommend, that it will 99.9% of the time work. That's what they're trying to guarantee. But if you know a little bit more about the components and what they actually are using and how you're building your system, you don't necessarily need that exact number.
Yep. But yeah, if you buy a 500 watt power supply and then next time you upgrade to a 250 watt GPU, then you're really starting to push the envelope there, and that's when that thing may actually give up the ghost sooner than later.
And it might not even do 250 watts on the PC,
well,
depending on how low end of a power supply you've got.
Yeah, it depends on how the rails are configured and stuff like that. And when power supplies blow up, all bets are off.
Could take out your components with it.
It really could, yeah. So I don't cheap out on the power supply for that reason, and maybe that's why I've never had one die. Not sure. All right, Tim. Now, this is like that GIF, that meme where the guy's just the water. I'm going to get a bottle of water and pour it over your head. You ready?
Yeah.
Linux versus Windows. Performance benchmarking when?
Seems to be a hot topic.
So first of all, I need to do it really quickly, do the disclaimer. We think that Linux is a valued piece of software and it's really good and we like Linux and...
Don't come for us on the road.
Yeah, I need to script that and rehearse it a few times. But
what I'm guaranteeing that will happen, which I think happened maybe a couple of times previously, people will link to a certain timestamp after we've said all this. And so all the context relating to the question will be completely removed.
Yeah, like look at these
and we'll look
Microsoft
like an
shills.
idiot.
Look at these Windows shills. They love, yeah. No, it's just sort of I guess an in-house joke. In Q&As before, we've discussed Linux, and we've pretty much only had positive things to say about Linux while noting, I guess, the shortcomings, like some things you can't do, whether or not that's Linux's fault is neither here nor there. It's a fact, while absolutely just dunking on Windows. And then we get like r/Linux Gaming coming in and getting extremely upset. Like, Tim has offended them greatly.
Oh no.
So anyway, a bit of a joke there. But yeah, Linux versus Windows. Are we going to do any game benchmarks or performance testing? Because obviously Gamers Nexus has recently announced they're adding that to their day one reviews, which personally I think is an odd choice. Again, don't want to offend anyone there with those comments, but if they do offend you, I guess find a way to deal with that. But I just don't think the install base is large enough to warrant sort of, for lack of a better term, clogging up the review.
It's a toss-up of testing like more games in Windows versus fewer games in Windows with some in Linux, because it's a time thing.
Well, I think for the desktop market, so I'm not even talking gaming specific, I'm talking about like this includes Office PCs, just desktop PCs in general, Microsoft has over 80% of the market share. And last I looked, Linux is estimated for desktop PCs, so not servers and stuff, but desktop PCs, they're estimated to have 3 to 4%. Now,
that seems high, even just anecdotally, but sure.
That was the research. Now, people might be like, but you're an influencer and you should be promoting it and this and that. It's like, well, no, you've got the wrong impression on how this works. Like, we're creating content for you guys that are using certain things, and if we primarily switch to Linux-based testing, our channel would shrivel up because the vast majority of you aren't interested in that. So
we know the stats from our YouTube channel as well.
Yep.
Like the percentage that view from a Linux device is very low.
Yep.
It's like 1 or 2%.
But it's not on us to promote Linux. Like, that's on Linux to sort out whatever they need to so that people actually want to use Linux. We actually would like to use Linux. If it was a viable option, we would be investigating and testing it right now. But for reasons we've discussed 1,000 times on the channel, it feels like at this point in time, we can't switch to Linux because things we actually need to use for our actual workflow aren't supported. And then the games that we like to play, Tim on occasion and me primarily, don't work at all. Whose fault that is, don't know, don't care. I mean, I kind of know, but it's also irrelevant in this discussion. The fact is they don't work. Therefore, at this point in time, it's not really a viable option for me. So
I think that like the Linux versus Windows performance testing, it'd be interesting to do it just from like a for science thing. Obviously, we do testing on the channel of all sorts of things. It's not always like a super relevant configuration. Again, maybe Linux people get upset that I say Linux isn't a super relevant configuration.
Despite the fact that the stats say that it isn't. But
well,
anyway.
yeah, that's true. But also just, we test weird configurations sometimes to show certain things. I think we're in a position, and we talked about this, we've got a whole podcast episode where we just air our grievances about the current state of Windows. And I think that people are as primed as they ever have been to use a different operating system. So I think if we looked 5 years ago, I don't think there'd be very much interest in people switching to Linux outside of a very small crowd. Now it seems to be much more viable and people are much more interested in maybe not necessarily switching themselves, but at least like learning about it. Like, if I do switch from Windows, what would it be like? Can I run the games I want to play? What's the performance going to be like? Is there anything to be gained from using Linux, etc.? Because Windows is so bad, that's effectively the position a lot of people are in. They're desperate for something that's not going to suck and have AI added to it and all this crap that no one wants to use, right? So there's that. So in terms of that investigation, I think that's interesting. In terms of making it something that, we're doing benchmarks knowing that this is something a lot of people are actually using as a configuration, which is a lot of what we test on the channel. Most of the things we test are what we feel are like realistic use cases, realistic configurations that you might use, and so would get that information from. Linux isn't there yet. I think that's just the reality. Linux is not there yet. One of the main issues for me is, we test a suite of games. We would have to stick to a very specific type of game, which is usually your single player titles that have good support via, the emulation or quasi emulation tools that are currently available. All your multiplayer things with anti-cheat, my understanding is they just flat out don't work, and there's no real path to get them to work. Like you can't really mod the anti-cheat features to work. It's more on the game developers to support it. And so, it's sort of that slow process over time. So if we were sitting here today and there was like 50% of people were using Linux for gaming, we would 100% be benchmarking it right now. You'd see videos on the channel right now of people using it, but it's currently in that for science sort of category, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's right. We can't force that change really. And it's not what we do anyway. So
maybe we're actually more influential than we think we are, but I don't think that if we made a video showing what Linux could do right now, that we would actually be convincing people to switch to Linux all that much. I think people who are already interested in that are already primed to look in the places.
Well, I think we'd be telling them that, it's improved since we last looked at it. And we have looked at it in the past. Primarily used it for sort of more server-side testing, productivity benchmarks. But if you're going, if we're doing that, we'd be sort of reviewing or doing a video about switching to Linux for gaming, right?
Yeah, like what are the benefits?
Yeah.
How does the performance stack up compared to Windows? Is there anything that can be gained there? What are the things that don't work or you'd have trouble doing?
And ultimately, the conclusion is, while things are looking promising, it's cool at least it does that or whatever, it's not something you can realistically switch to if you play a massive range of games like PUBG,
I'm playing
Apex
Battlefield.
Legends.
I'm playing Battlefield 6 right now. Like, I know I'm a single player game or whatever. Right now, I'm playing a game that does not work on Linux, and so I couldn't have switched my system to that.
Yeah, but I mean, I think the majority of the top 15 games on Steam probably don't work on Linux.
Yep.
So,
I
don't know what certain people want us to do with that. That's the situation. I wish it wasn't the situation. I desperately wish it wasn't the situation, but that's the reality. And that being the reality, there's absolutely nothing I can do about it. I don't know what people that get upset with us for not testing Linux want us to do about that.
Yeah, and I think there's currently strong incentives for those problems to be solved more than there have been. So, we're seeing a lot of, well, not a lot of, but the most popular handheld PC gaming device is the Steam Deck, which runs Linux. And so we run SteamOS, right? So Valve is incentivized to make more games work on that platform because they are actually selling you hardware that runs a Linux operating system, and so they need game support to be really good. And that is what's driven a lot of this game support, game compatibility. But obviously, there's games that still don't work. So, I feel like if it came out that there was something like SteamOS that had this backing of a large gaming company and they did a desktop release, that would be a really interesting thing to look at on the channel. But still today, it's kind of more your niche.
But we are absolutely considering we have plans to do that sort of testing anyway as standalone content.
Yeah. Not day one reviews is far off.
Yeah.
That seems far off. More like, do people want to see Linux versus Windows benchmarking? Is this question is sort of asked? I think yes. And I think we probably will try to do something like that at some point.
Yeah, why it's a bad choice, in my opinion, for day one reviews is because we only have so much time for the day one review process. And through decades of experience, we've really optimized that process. We're pretty efficient with it now. Like we did the RTX 5060 over at Computex, and we got quite a lot of testing done. So we've really optimized that process to provide you as much relevant information as possible, which is why we don't do a lot of the for science type testing in the day one reviews.
Yeah, there's no productivity testing in there on GPUs.
On GPUs, yep. For our audiences, we think you guys are primarily interested in gaming, but just other things as well, like investigations into how aspects of the card work, which can be interesting, but I think they're more standalone pieces. They're not going to make or break the purchasing decision. So we've really, again, optimized our day one reviews to be like consumer advice, give you all the relevant information you need to purchase that product. And I think adding Linux at this point in time it just doesn't benefit that. Like it's unoptimized because, as I said, there's so few people actually using that.
You'd have to sacrifice some of the things that are being tested to fit in the Linux stuff. And what do people want to see sacrificed? Do you want us to cover fewer games?
So
or...
instead of like 12, 14, 18 games, whatever we're fitting in at any given time, depending on where we are with updating our game suite, then yeah, we would have to sacrifice a good amount of those games. So, if we were to add Battlefield 6, for example, to future day one reviews, and maybe Borderlands 4, I don't know.
Yeah.
But some newer games, we actually wouldn't do that. You'd see like Shadow of the Tomb Raider sticking around for longer because, we're not having all the time and effort to update the results because we're having to add Linux. So anyway, that's just, as I said, there's a finite amount of time to get that content out. And, people might say to that, well, don't rush the day one reviews to get them out or whatever. But I wouldn't say we rush them anyway. We have an appropriate amount of time. We give them more time than a lot of content. But the idea is to get it out ahead of time so that way you guys are armed with as much information as possible when you go to purchase this new hardware. Because to get the most value out of the hardware, you generally want to buy it as soon as possible.
Yep.
Not wait 6 months because you've lost 6 months of value. Anyway, Linux, get on it, Tim. Start testing now. All right, that is going to do it for part 2 of the October Q&A. As I mentioned at the start, there will be a part 3. And if you missed part 1, what do they do, Tim?
Well, now is the time, after having seen the questions from this episode, to go back and watch part 1.
That does sound right.
Yes, so Hardware Unboxed YouTube page, just click in there. I actually updated the playlist on our main channel recently, so we've now got
you could
some nice stuff in there.
We won't hold it against you if you go to our playlist, hit play, and then leave your computer for like maybe a month.
Yeah, YouTube, have you noticed sometimes on YouTube, and this is very random now.
Oh, good.
That if you leave a video playing for a while and you're not there, sometimes it comes up with a little message saying, "Are you still there?"
All right, create a macro
to click that button.
Set it for every half hour just to be safe.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode. We've got the join button, Patreon. If you want to become a member, get access to our exclusive Discord server, monthly live streams, Q&A stuff, and behind the scenes content. If not, that's perfectly fine. I won't hold it against you, but as usual, Tim will. And I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim. See you in the next one.